Hi, my name is Pierre Schiller. I am a Blender Foundation certified trainer. My job is to help artists and studios integrate Blender into their pipelines. In this new introductory course from Blender to Snapchat, we will produce a character animation to interact in our phones using Lens Studio from Snapchat as an augmented reality filter. Courses like this are possible thanks to my Patreon's support. I post exclusive content which you can also have access to in a support by creation method. Check it out for more news for upcoming training material and exclusive files. Thank you for selecting this training video. Part 1 will be covering the modeling and texturing of our 3D character. In Part 2 we will do a quick Lens Studio project so you can familiarize with the interface. Part 3 will cover the workflow to generate animation and actions in the NLA. In Part 4, we will cover interactions and general workflows, plus recommendations for future projects. AR development is a rising demanding area in the world of 3D, especially with the latest functions in smartphones. Snapchat is a company that is always seeking new talent to generate AR experiences. Check this contest they are having to find new AR creators that can use Lens Studio fluently. There are different job opportunities around the web looking for creative AR experiences and animators. Without further ado, let's start with the introduction from Blender to Snapchat training course. This first video is 50 minutes long and will take you from start to finish of this model, including texturing and shading. So as you can see, we already have the body created, and you can extract or you can use any other reference in the internet around the web, free 3D websites that offer you the basis for a human character. Okay, you don't have to model every time everything from scratch or from zero. You can download them, just delete the UVs and repurpose that 3D object. Nowadays, I find out that many people say that tracing over an image from a picture or remodeling a previously created 3D mesh, it's like cheating, and it's not considered, an artistic approach to create something. But let me tell you something. Repurposing is the main objective whenever you're creating something for either your studio or your own personal project, because you need to time management effectively when you're working on this kind of projects. So if there is something that has been already created and then you can edit it to fit your needs in less time possible, then it is worth taking notes. It is worth taking the time to re-edit it. Of course, you need to check on free open source license or a free model for you to use. So what we're seeing right here, it's the modeling of the jacket. Why did I specifically decided to start with this video about it? Because the most problems I see whenever we're working on AR and VR, it's clothing. Clothing are difficult to create. As you already know, it will add more polygon count to your current project. I've been looking around for a polygon calculator, if we can say it so. In that way, we can know how much our project will weigh once we export it. Like, for example, I think this specific model, once it was finished, was around 11,000 triangles, and that weighed about I think it was 800 kilobytes or 1.8 megabytes. I don't remember quite well, but either case, whatever you do, you always need to optimize your 3D model for the end target platform, which in this case will be the phones. And it's not because it's a requirement for the phone to work, but on the contrary, platforms like Snapchat and Facebook and Instagram have a limit of 4 megabytes per filter, which means that whatever you create, either with textures, effects, or 3D meshes, should not surpass the 4 megabyte limit. Now, this is another important reason why I wanted to create this training course, because I will be telling you a lot of technical aspects that you need to know so that you do not fall into the pitfalls of creating stuff or creating assets, 3D assets, that will not enter into the filter revision process. Because for everything you create, there is a human revision process of your filter, which means that whatever you submit, besides being technically correct, human beings review your effect in order for your filter to be published worldwide. That is to be understood to be published on any of the social platforms you're submitting to. The most popular ones are Snapchat through the application Snapchat, obviously, Facebook, and also Instagram. But they do not use Lens Studio. Lens Studio is exclusively for Snapchat Lens users. And this social platform is making important moves towards developing and authoring a very solid software, very friendly to use for marketing campaigns, for democracy even. And of course, there are some dark sides to every social web, which I will not talk about in this series. But you should know that whenever you're working to publish an effect based, for example, in pop culture, then you're free to do it so as long as you comply to the terms of use of their websites. And of course, if you know them, then your effect gets reviewed and then it gets published. Of course, you get metrics, of course, you get exposition, and of course, if you're doing this for a studio, you get also paid, which is the intention for all of this, to create everything you're going to be working in using Blender, for example, which is an open source 3D software. Like you already know, if you bought this, you should know how Blender works. And due to its nature, the recent public release of 2.9 version brought to the table a lot of technical support to create even more amazing stuff using cloth, physics simulation, and even particles. Particles are going through a huge change right now. But enough of that, that's like the context of how we work here. And as you can see right now, the jacket is already finished. Now let's address the skaters. For this, as you can see, the entire skate wheels are already merged with the other ones. But what we need to do now is just to delete these ones and create a new array. We're going to be separating this wheel so that we can use an array on it. So I'm going to press P, separate it, add a mirror modifier, and then duplicate the count. And of course, you can do that with this. Why do we need to do this instead of individual merged meshes? Because we can texture only once, and that will propagate through the other wheels. And that's a very smart way of working. Now, this I need to say concisely and repetitively. You need to optimize your models. Okay, always try to optimize your models, especially with UV texturing. So right now we're going to explore how to do that. As you can see, only the half of the body has been already created, and now I'm using a mirror modifier to have the other side obviously complete this model as well. And what you want to do is to enter into edit mode and define the seams. But this girl has a tank top, which needs also to be UV'd. So how are we going to approach this? We're going to create the seams by selecting edges and then press Ctrl E. By pressing Ctrl E, you're going to have access to the edges menu, and from there on you will click and select Mark Seam. This is how you mark seams, the cuts that the UV editor will need to know how to display the UV texturing atlas. Now, as our goal is to optimize everything, we need to create one single map or one single atlas for this character. And so we're going to define those cuts right now, as you can see, from the top of the palm, under the palm of the hand, on the wrists, and now from the internal part of the pants. So this is like everyday clothing. If you notice, whenever you dress, you should notice the cloth seams that your cloth has. And that's what we are trying to emulate right here. So now I'm going to press U, and then I'm going to select Unwrap, Automatic Unwrap. I'm going to open another window, which I will turn into a UV editor. And from there on, you can see we have the different sections of this model. Now the way I'm working here is through islands. That's the little icon that you see on the top here. And this other icon that I just clicked on with the two arrows, it's called the sync mode. See, the sync mode. And what it does is that whenever you select on the 3D viewport your model, everything in your UV space will be highlighted. Okay, this is very important because only in this mode you can select individual parts. In the UV editor, you can also seam, or rather you can reattach whatever seams you had before. So let's say I'm going to select one of the single points that we have right here, and I'm going to go into automatic stitching. So as you can see, I grabbed all of those points, and then I can organize them later. Of course, I can also merge them together. So there are different tools here in the UV editor that will help you accomplish that. I'm going to click now the Relax tool, which will help me to distribute the vertices or faces in our mesh. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to grab these two things, and then I'm going to weld them together. So I'm going to use that option. I'm going to filter select vertices, and now I just merge them together, just like we do in 3D. So the intention of relaxing the mesh is so that the texture will get correctly distributed and not stretch. It should not look stretched, and for that we have two purposes. As you notice, if I relax on to the all of these vertices, then the mesh will tend to deform abruptly. How do we correctly stretch it then? We can use pin points. That way you can select your vertices first, then go to the UV editor, the UV menu, and from there on you can select pin. Once they are pinned, they will not move, and then you can proceed to relax inside of the mesh. So like we were mentioning before, we need to UV atlas all of these little islands that were created from the original model. As you remember, we, for example, cut the lower part of the palm, the hand palm, and the upper part, and that's why you see two palms there. So let's identify the parts. When I click on automatic sync, like in sync mode, those two little arrows on the top left part of the UV editor, Then I go to the 3D view and then I select whatever points I need to know where do they belong to. For in this case, I am selecting this lower part, then I'm switching back from the sync mode, the two little arrows, and so I now can change to filter select vertices by pressing 1, or in this case by using the island, which is the fourth icon on the top right. I'm sorry, on the top left. And let's try to stitch this together. As you can see, whenever you select one group vertices, then you left click once and that will preview how you're going to stitch. And then if you click again, left click again, it will completely the operation. It will complete the operation. And then you can arrange them. This is proportional editing, what you're seeing right now, and it is created by pressing the letter O. This activates a special neighboring fall off, which will drag the rest of the vertices accordingly to what you're doing, or in this case, what you're arranging with the vertices. So again, you can switch that off, and now I need to put this back as closely as I can into the correct place. So as you can see, there are a lot of different places where this should belong that need to be stitched together again. Whoops. Let's undo that, and from here on I can either do it manually, or let me switch again to the sync selection, and now I'm going to place it on top. That way it's going to work for the shoulder region rather than the back, because most of the models are going to be facing front and not the back, so we will get our UV texturing in that area correctly anyways. What we're looking at right now is that the model looks awesomely perfect from the front. So let's UV unwrap the skates. So I'm going to select the skates and I'm going to define the cuts around here. Now this is another process I decided to slow down for you so you can see that we have different topologies for different situations, of course, for different everyday objects which you can use. So what I am using as a guide to define my cuts, it's the front appearance of the skate, and this is only one skate because again I'm using a mirror modifier. I do not have the other one that is automatically being projected when I use this modifier. So the next thing I need to do is to define the under the foot region. So I'm going to cut this here, and now I'm going to loop select all of this part down here, and then I'm going to have another cut for the trails of the skate line support, and I'm going to make an internal face and then another external face. So I'm going around as a loop, as you can see. One of the defining things on UV unwrapping, on UVing an object, it's to define loops that will help you identify the form on the UV layout. Now, as you can see, I am not going to add a different new material. I am just going to unwrap it and then leave it outside of the other regions that we already created the UVs from. Why? Because when we are done opening or unwrapping all of these coordinates, we're going to put them or distribute them by hand manually inside Blender. Other 3D packages already have a UV packing option, And that is very convenient because whenever you're working, then you can select your entire model and then it will automatically distribute the islands. But in our case, we're not going to do that because we rather tend to optimize even better when we're doing this manually. Of course, you need to approach this in a different way than other softwares, but nevertheless, it can be done here in Blender. As you can see, I am already packing the skate plus the wheel. And now I don't think we're going to need to do this in the original character. This is like a long cable which resembles a tail, because this character is like kind of a cyber girl cat. So what we're going to do is just to define one region, and we're also going to duplicate that region using the array modifier. In that way, again, we are only going to texture one single piece, but then because of the array modifier, we can create a single mesh already textured from one single piece. So that's what you saw me doing there. I already have that. Let me scale this. I'm going to be placing this inside a convenient space. All right, that's the skate, and this is the cable tail. As you can see, it fits perfectly. So this was one of the reasons why I was mentioning that it is important that you get this process by practice all together in one single map. Now from there on, of course, if you're going to create a realistic material with PBR approach, then you can as well bake or create everything in one single 2K map. This is another important thing to keep in mind. You're not going to be creating very highly detailed texture maps. No, you're going to create at most 2K maps. That's it. Don't go beyond that because the platform is not going to let you. As you know, one single 4K map could be around 2.6 megabytes or above, depending on whatever image you are saving, which in our texture will be full color texture. But if you're adding to that 4 more maps for PBR development, then you're like quadrupling the weight of your entire project just in textures alone, and there's no way to compress them once the project is going to be sent. And what is going to happen is that whenever you do surpass the limit of a Snapchat or Lens Studio, then you're going to get an error, an upload error. It will tell you that the project cannot be exported because you exceeded your quota, which is only 4 megabytes. So let's go and do the same process of UV unwrapping your head. So for this, we have different elements such as the eyes, and it is very convenient that you know that if you're going to unwrap, for example, the eyelashes, you can press 1 to set your camera front view without any distortions, selecting your mesh in edit mode, and then press U to select project from view, because that is exactly how we get this shape in our eyelashes and also our eyebrows. They are directly projected from the view, as you can see right here. And we are going to do the same for the eyes. So let's just grab that. Let's get them out of the way because we're going to recompose the atlas later on. So we have the face right here. And as you can see, it's very limited in polygons. I mean, you can put more polygons, but performance-wise, it is best that you stick to this. So now, as you can see, we have other problems. We have the inner sections of the hair and also the eyes, which have all been merged together when we created this model. I am presenting this because it's a common problem that you're going to get if you download other people's models or you inherit someone else's models, because they do not know anything about optimizing. But it is your responsibility, your duty, to make sure that everything that you're going to UV atlas is correctly displayed and correctly identified. So that's what we're going to do right here. We're going to grab all of the hair parts. We're going to leave them corresponding to all of the hair areas. Now, another important thing that you should notice is that your DPI resolution for this is just going to be around 72 DPI. Yes, Mr. Schiller, but my phone is an 8K screen phone. You know, I can watch cinema like if it was on the movie theater. It's got an amazing 32 megapixels of resolution for just a selfie camera. Yes, we know that. Phones are getting pretty amazing these days, but the reality is that your filter is going to be used only in such little space that most of the items and most of the meshes that you're unwrapping right now will not be seen above 150 dpi. And Mr. Schiller, why are you talking DPI when we are talking about pixels? You should be talking about pixels. Yes, I am talking about DPI because whenever you're texturing Photoshop, which you will see ahead in the video, you're going to manage your resolution with the points in screen. And in reality, 300 dpi, it's almost close as having a good resolution, but your phone ultimately will downscale it to what the filter sees. So there's no point to creating a huge texture if your filter is not going to support it one-to-one resolution. That is to be meant if you were projecting your filter through a CinemaScope screen or the cinema screen, then you will have to create a huge texture with a lot of detail, 4K and above in size, so you can have the correct aspect ratio, and also you will get no distortions at all. But since your phone is downscaling your own screen in order for the effect of the filter to take part of the camera or part of the picture that you're creating, then you do not need to create anything above 2K. So just to stick with that rule, here is our atlas. Now this square, this UV space, is designed to be filled by 2K size texture. But first we need to organize our different parts. This is the helmet, as you can see. It's fitting nicely here. We have other different parts like the mask, for example, the cat mask, which is right here. So we're going to organize this in the best way possible so that all of the spaces for these objects will display our texture once we paint it in the correct proportional size. So right now what you see that I'm doing here is to mirror both parts of the hair, which almost resemble, but have just so ever slightly changed. And that is good because that's, you know, the way hair is. And I mean that from the video game perspective. And Mr. Schiller, I've seen AR filters that really look ugly, like 2000 style video game. Why is this? Why can't we create better stuff? Well, you can, of course you can. You can go to Substance Painter and give a lot of good surfacing details for your texture. But we are concentrating here on creating a stylized character because that's the line I really like. I will briefly include one quick project so that I can show you how it would look if you were to export a single 3D asset using PBR textures, but just as a matter of reference and context. That's it. Because if you are interested in this series, depending on the reaction and the comment thing of the people acquiring this, I could continue to create different other training materials, other special training materials for realistic objects. That's not a problem. But I do this because this series were already promised before the difficult year that we had due to COVID. And now it's time to just upload it so that people will get their reward, because as I have mentioned before, this is done through Patreon. So whenever I post stuff there and people really seem to be looking forward to that type of training, then it's a very good opportunity for me to develop these things so that the community in general will take advantage of the open source tool like Blender. And right now, just as a small comment here, I am trying Armory Paint to substitute Substance Painter. But if you already pilot Substance Painter, which is a monster by itself, it's a fantastic program, then that will give you a good edge to create even more stylized or realistic PBR materials. But enough of that, let's complete this. As you can see, now the UV Atlas is finally completed. I am taking this and let's rotate this. The way you rotate stuff here is by doing it with the keyboard or with the tools that we have here on the UV editor. So you can press R, twist it on the x-axis, RX, and then type 90 on your numpad and then press enter. That way it will roll or rotate in the axis that you saw. So let's check it out. I'm going to select the body. Let me open this over here. And now we find that if you click your object and then press tab, you can enter into texture paint mode. And now I'm going to ask for the properties on the properties panel, which you can find on your right hand. And from there on, I'm going to assign all of the materials, which is one single material, to everything we have in here for her. Okay, so the wheels, assign the same material, the body, the same material. And now let's create the nodes. So I'm going to attach an image node, which is the image node that we previously created. In this case, it's called IP Mascarena Color PNG. And of course, we're going to save that. And now I'm going to open the UV editor. I'm going to be using that map. And let's try to paint something. So select texture paint, select your color, and just do a quick stroke so you can see what's going on. Let's now enter into the texturing part. This is fun. Now if you go to the properties, you will see on this icon where is the screwdriver and the wrench, you will see the properties to work on texture paint with the brushes. And of course, one of the things that we need to do here is to sample the correct colors for our character. So I have this image reference and I'm going to be referencing, for example, the pants. And then I'm going to start drawing. Now, it is very important that you define in which mode of the viewport you're painting into. Right now, my view is set to shaded view. So that's why I know that everything I'm doing, it's being displayed correctly here in the viewport. Also, if you notice down here on my materials, I have the image node connected to an emission node, which is set to 1, and that one is connected to my material. Why do I want to do this? Other software applications which work around texture painting know this issue, and you can select your viewport to be on flat shading view. But in order for us, for Blender, to get a flat shaded view, you need to use an emission node, which I am using right here. Also, my texture settings, or in this case my render engine settings, are set to Eevee, real-time engine. And that is how you get your material to appear with a constant, or as we say in other software, as a flat shading material. And we want to do this because we need to correctly paint the model. Now, another very useful thing that you need here to work, it's that if you go to your overlays menus, which is those little two intersecting spheres that you can see right there under the radius on the top paint bar. Those two little shading balls that you have intersecting each other are called the overlay menus. And the overlay menus, you can activate geometry wireframe. And that way we can paint exactly whenever we are seeing these polygons, faces, so that we can paint them in the corresponding area without affecting any other area that we are not interested in painting. For example, I'm going to limit myself to only this row right here. You can see that, right? And then everything else, of course, will be the regular color of the paint. And this I am doing all inside Blender. As you can see, there's nothing special about it. You just select your brush tool, I'm sorry, and then start painting. If you have a digital Wacom graphical tablet, you know, the ones that have the screen, then you can directly drag the Blender window and start painting over it. And the way you can roll around, it's by hovering with your right mouse click on the stylus or your middle mouse in the stylus to pan. Okay, that's the way you can do that, hovering. Now, of course, if you're going to paint, you can press onto the screen and then continue your process. I really recommend you to visit my channel specifically for the grease, pencil, and texturing time lapses of this specific character, which are in my channel, in my YouTube channel, Active Motion Pictures, so you can check the process with a little bit more patience. But here we are defining the size of the brush, for example, by pressing F. If you press F while you're in texturing paint mode, your brush size will interactively increase or decrease depending on what your selection is. And the hardness, that is to be understood, the transparency, how much transparency you will get. You can get it by pressing Shift F. If you press Shift F, your brush is going to paint with a certain fall off that you can define. 1 means no fall off at all, and that is a very rigid, very solid line. While if you have a fall off of, let's say, 0.3, then you will get a soft fall off for your paint. And that is very useful for painting shadows, for example. Shadows under stuff, for example, like under here, you can use a soft fall off. Okay, so I'm going to define this region with the brush. And of course, as you remember, this island right here, we were trying to connect with the top part. You can do that as well, of course. I just left it like this because I want you to try the pin function and also the bridge and weld. You are going to get this project completed, of course, and the model. Please do not use it for commercial purposes. This is just for learning purposes. This model right here does not belong to me, as you can see, but we're using it as a reference to create this process. So please be aware, it is not to be intended to be used commercially. Please. Okay, so save yourself a lot of trouble. Just use it for your own personal purposes and everything will be just fine. So let's continue to paint the shirt. As you can see, it's a time-lapse accelerated video. I think this is like 10x velocity, 10x speed, but it's pretty much straightforward. So you paint and paint. Mr. Schiller, what happens if I want to erase something? I did a drawing that I wasn't supposed to do and now I need to erase. Well, the basic approach here is that you select a similar color to what you want to erase, which in our case will be white. As you can see, you can select white and then just paint white over whatever area you did not do good. So that's one approach. And the second approach, if you were working on a transparent texture, then what you need to do is to go to brush, and in the mode like you have right here, mix, you need to change that to alpha. And once you do that, whatever you draw, then you will be erasing effectively your alpha. That is to be translated as you're erasing your strokes. But in our case, since we're working on a flat color, which in this case is white, then nothing wrong should happen. If you fail, then just sample the colors from the previously underlying color. If you failed, for example, in your skin color, then you can sample the skin, repaint, and then continue the process. So, Mr. Schiller, what happens if I need to draw straight lines? I'm not very good like doing straight lines. Well, you have a lazy mode here on the top menu for the brush, which you can activate. Instead of space, you will select lazy mode. In that way, you can draw, and then you will see a little icon representing how much of a delayed stroke it has. What it will do is to create a softer trace of your stroke. Okay, so you have all of these options right here. You saw, you can put pause on the video that I just switched the stroke mode to line, specifically to answer that kind of question. And from there, I can click and then drag, and the brush will paint in a line. Now I'm going to switch back again to space, and that is the regular brush, as you can see. So that's how you create straight lines. There are other interesting methods, but I'm not going to be addressing that because this is not going to be a full texturing tutorial. I just want to comment on this section because you really need to know what are the necessary requirements for your texture to work. Okay? Now, of course, we're just creating one single color texture, but in here you can have the normal texture and also the specular. And finally, let's go to another program which I like to use, which is called 3D Coat. Here on 3D Coat, I completed the character by painting the hair, by painting the eyes, and also by painting other body parts such as the mask. And what you're seeing right now is me working on the highlights, which are directly painted over the hair. As you can see, her hair is not even that much dark. And whoops, let me correct this. We have tools with different brush settings so that we can arrange softening this area. Right now, I'm going to say 3D Coat, please connect to Krita, which is another open source tool software. 3D Coat, it's a paid software, but Krita is an open source software. And in this case, I need to blend that little mistake that you saw on her face. And Krita just so happens to have awesome, really organic blending modes brushes. And as a matter of fact, it has a myriad of very organic watercolor oil painting brushes. So I really recommend you to check out Krita. If you don't know anything about Krita, then feel free please to ask for more tutorials about Blender and Krita. I can do them for you so you can see the power that you can have from both worlds. So let's continue here on 3D Coat. And right now I'm going to paint the inside of the eyes. That's the way it kind of works whenever you're checking your model from a certain angle. But the reality is that no one is going to be checking her eyes that much close. So I'm going to leave them just white. Let's continue with the process of the hair. Right now, as you can see here, I can even use curves, and you can use this in Blender as well. You can create a curve, then use your brush, set it instead of a space or line, you can set it to curve. Then it's going to ask you which curve are you going to be using to paint. And then you will create manually a curve in Blender, and then you will do this, what you just saw me do here on 3D Code. That's why I'm using 3D Code, because it's projected directly here in the geometry, and then you press enter, and with that it's painted. My purpose here is not that you can learn 3D Code in just a single video, because I get it, there are a lot of settings and tools that you need to be aware of first. But I'm presenting you 3D Code here because you can even use Mari, you can use other softwares like GIMP, for example, to paint your textures. But the awesome thing about 3D Code is that you can open your model in 3D right here. You have different layers and you can assign those layers materials. This is like a Substance Designer choice as well, because you can do this exact same things in Substance Painter, not Designer, Substance Painter. But I prefer to use 3D Code because it's a lot of, it's most economic. And it's very powerful. I've been using this software like around quite some time now. Since the very, very early versions. So I've seen this software practically evolve through time. So let's complete this. Here what I'm doing is painting the darkest areas. Now, of course, when we rig this, it's going to be very difficult to create every single strand of hair. You can do it so, but this tutorial, like I mentioned before, its purpose is to walk you quickly through all of the steps. But you can continue to do those steps on your own time. So I'm going to be painting some more highlights with a color that I already have. And of course, if you have any questions about the entire process, be this on 3D Code, be this on Krita, be this on Blender, be this on Lens Studio, feel free to write and post your questions on any video related time-lapse that I have on my YouTube channel, or directly writing through the Patreon account. I'll be more than glad to answer all of your questions. So to finalize, on the head, I just painted some very harsh strokes. So now I'm going to switch to Krita. You can tell 3D Code to target Krita and as an external editor. And as you can see, I am selecting this brush over here, which is a blending brush, and it works like magic. Look at that. I can blend between the two colors seamlessly. I really like this one. You can define the opacity, you can define the size, and as you can see, this texture is pretty much completed. We have the skin, we have the eyes, which you can also see on my YouTube channel, how we painted those. And here we are on the final part to define the model internal meshes. For example, the gums and the teeth. Of course, none of this is going to be seen on the final animation. I just wanted to let you know that you can hide objects, paint them, and then make them appear again for the final export. Also, you can block objects, and let's complete this. Yeah, because it didn't look too good right here. Okay, that's looking better. Highlights. Perfect. So yeah, this process is kind of lengthy. This took me around, let's say 6 hours. Yeah, around 6 hours. And switching from Blender to Krita to 3D Code pretty much takes around a day. Now, of course, you can do this quickly if you made your UV mapping like we mentioned before, so that if we paint one piece, every other piece, because it was replicated with the array modifier, then it will paint itself automatically, like you're seeing right now. So we only need to paint it anywhere once, and then it's propagated through the entire model. That's working smartly. Now let's address the mask. Probably this is the most iconic item in the object itself. because she's got this cat mask that in the end will have lightning eyes. The idea there, lightning eyes. The idea there is that she will have an emission shader, or rather an emission parameter, to define for the eyes. But of course, if you paint one single emission color, then you will not get the value range that the light emits whenever it's being propagated. Therefore, you need to make the source a darker color than the outer part of the light. That is to be understood, the base needs to be darker for the bloom to work, or in this case, the emission to work. We can also certainly create some highlights, which I am going to be again blending here on Krita. So as you can see, it takes just a little bit of time to load the texture and all of the channels. But Krita recognizes them all without any problems. And when I mean recognizes them, it means that it preserves your channel data, such as diffuse, in this case, normals. Yes, Krita can paint normals as well. And you can then save the file. Automatically, it will refresh back into 3D Code. I don't know if this can work around Substance Painter. I guess it will. But I don't think Substance Painter has the ability to select an external editor. I think everything you do, you work it inside Substance Painter. So that's another reason why I choose 3D Code and Krita to be the perfect companion tools for this task. It is another very important thing to mention here, that you can see that I am painting physical highlights. Like, this is supposed to be a metal mask. So I'm selecting a higher color to represent edges on the vertices of this mask. That is to be understood, whenever we get a shiny area, you need to paint that shiny area. Of course, we can define a glossy map. Of course, we can define a specular map and a roughness map. That's the optimal thing. But we are not approaching this in a PBR shader method. We are approaching this just as a flat shading method. Although, this is going to be correctly called a diffuse shader back in Lens Studio, okay? We're not going to be using the flat material, although I think in the end I did use it. I don't remember at this point. But we are certainly going to explore what the PBR material, what the diffuse shader, what the emission node does, and a couple of other specific materials which you can generate with Substance Painter or any other software that you have, including Blender. So that your bump maps, your normal maps, your emission maps, anything and everything will connect all nicely, including your AO maps, your ambient occlusion maps, roughness, everything. So let's go for the helmet. The mask is already done. There is nothing new on this part either. We're just flat coloring the entire helmet. But what we want to do is to add these highlights that I previously mentioned before, because that will give the appearance of volume for this material, for this mesh, I'm sorry. And like we mentioned before, if you need to erase, then you just select the previous color. You can sample the previous color, and then you can paint over. I'm going to be defining these areas around here, because this is like, I don't know, it looks like a telecommunicator. So behind the helmet, around the areas of the sides, notice how that small highlight gives more depth to the helmet. This is what you should look for whenever you're creating game art, to have somehow presence of physical appearance, correct physical light appearance is what I meant. So, for example, these little scratches will have their own like depth if you can paint a little highlight or if you paint a little shadow, depending on which angle you're using. All of your light should be congruent to the camera. Like for example, all of my lights, my highlights, I am imagining a global top light which reflects just a little bit on the sides. And that's what we're seeing here. So that's how you get these intersections, which looks nice. And the helmet really feels its own wear and tear. Okay, so this is how it would look if it was shaded view, not flat view. Like we were mentioning before, this is the diffuse shading appearance, basic diffuse shading appearance. And this is the flat shading appearance. You can see that. And that is exactly what we were getting back in Blender. So we have the jacket at this point. You can paint it, of course. You're going to see that the project has a space for the jacket, but it is not painted because the jacket is a special case. It is a semi-transparent material. Therefore, I am not going to paint it. I'm going to leave it blank, but you can certainly complete her painting process. Why does it have a unfinished back? Because those polygons did not have their normals correctly aligned. Back in Blender, we should always check that our normals are normalized or given the same direction. We do that by entering the edit mode, selecting the entire object, and then press Shift N, which will average and rearrange all of the normals that you have. So this is our completed project. It looks fantastic. She looks fantastic. Look at the skates. Look at the skin. We also use the highlighting trick on the skin, and that's how we define some muscles there. And the shadow under her face was also painted in this way, directly painted, and it looks like she's very well lit. Now, of course, if you use bloom effects, ambient occlusion effects, here in Blender, you can use the emission shader to specifically select those eye polygons on the mask, assign them a new material, and then you can boost the emission energy, which in this case, you're seeing right here. Alright, so congratulations, you have a working model to go into the next step of the project.